Welcome back to the Rain Race podcast. Another episode of Rookie Hour, evidently. We fixed one problem. We introduced another one. This is actually a very weird one I haven't ever seen before in the year and a half we've used this software. I think we have working audio now. I will rely on people in the chat to yell at me and tell me I'm wrong, but it looks like people are already telling us that we're all set. Anyways, it's the start of a new WEC season, Stu. We got a lot to talk about here for the third time now. But just quick impressions from you. Let's get things started here. What are you thinking about this upcoming WEC season starting up?
Well, as Mr. Waffle said, third time's a charm. It's glad to actually be talking this time. It's going to be what a season that we're in for. You know, we're just a couple of days away now from seeing the first racing action for the Valkyrie. You know, there's so many changes for this WEC season to look forward to. We got a bit of a taste of some of those at the prologue. I mean, not the prologue. It's still ultimately a test, but you know, still got a taste for some of these things. Man, and it's race day in like 2 days during the work week, as we were talking about before we went on air, kind of. So it's wild to think that, you know, we're at the beginning of another season. It felt like just not that long ago we were starting the 2024 season. So 2025 is in full swing.
Yeah, it's a good thing about the off season in sports car racing is compared to a series like IndyCar. Our off season is actually relatively short once you factor in WEC rounding up in November, and then IMSA hitting the track in January.
Yep.
I will be forward right from the start here. I will show my cards to the dealer and say that actually we don't really have a very large script written out for this episode. Usually you and I will have a page or two of notes prepared out to discuss. Today it's just a couple bullet points, really. Going over what we saw at the prologue in the WEC for a few minutes. Spending some time just going over what we're looking forward to most in the 2025 WEC season. And then, of course, our much coveted predictions, which are very hit or miss, mostly miss, coming at the end of the episode.
This is the year. We said it
No,
before
you said
Daytona.
this at Daytona, but we didn't. Did we really hold true after Daytona, though?
I don't know. Did anybody? I don't remember what my picks were.
I know mine were doing really well for a while, but that's typically par for the course. So,
but I mean, we didn't make ourselves look like complete fools at Daytona. Daytona's a long race, 24-hour race. There's so much could happen. This is the first true test.
Yeah. And of course, as some of you already have been doing and know the drill by now, this is a live podcast, even though you would know it's a live podcast with how often we make mistakes here. And you have a chat box. You can leave some questions, and we'll try to get to some of those towards the end of the episode as well. Stu, first things off here, you sort of teased it a little bit, talking about the WEC prologue. Now, you know the drill by now. I mean, do we care about testing times on this show?
No, but there's probably a slight but there, right?
Yeah, I mean, largely no is the answer to that. The roar before the 24 is not entirely representative, nor is the WEC prologue entirely a clear picture of what we're going to see for the season. But nonetheless, there are still some things that we would like to go over. It was the first on-track official running we've seen for the World Endurance Championship classes this year. Second time on track for some of these guys after the Rolex 24 at Daytona, and I guess third if you include the Roar in official running. I'll say one thing right off the bat. BMW, we were talking about how strong they were at Daytona. Surprise, maybe you want to say surprise pole sitters there. Strong in the Roar at Daytona. I think they were fastest in the Roar as well there. And now sort of continuing that streak of being the fastest hypercar on track, being the fastest car at the WEC Prologue with the car number 20. Only car in the 138s at the end of the 2-day testing session with those 4 sessions we saw on track. And mind you, that 138.971 was quicker than the pole time from last year. So these cars are fast. They're getting up to speed really early, and we haven't even hit the official race weekend yet.
Yeah, the top 5 actually all beat last year's pole time, which is impressive, you know, considering There's Cadillac, BMW, Ferrari, sort of all in that mix. Which again, it's testing, so you can take things with a grain of salt. Like conditions might be different, but that's kind of an indicator that there were some serious times being put down in testing. It wasn't all just slowly rolling around the track, just putting in lap after lap. It was they were taking it seriously. So all of these quick times came in the fourth session, which probably isn't overly surprising, but maybe it gives us a lid. I mean, again, you can only take so much away from it, but from testing, the top five all showing good speed, multiple different manufacturers, some manufacturers that were kind of waiting to take that step forward, especially in the WEC with like BMW and Cadillac, for instance. Like I think both of those manufacturers have high expectations coming into this year. So yeah, maybe not much to take away from it, but something to look at, right? I don't really know how to analyze that anymore, other than testing times are interesting to look at, but take it with a grain of salt.
Well, and you could definitely make the argument that maybe these times are a little bit more representative than you might be led to believe. I mean, we're talking about how fast these times were. It's pretty clear that at least the top teams that we're seeing here, if you mentioned 5 of those cars were underneath last year's pole time, so it's not like we're heavily sandbagging around here.
Yeah.
And as we mentioned, BMW, they were quick in the roar. I remember a couple episodes back before Daytona, you and I were saying, "Oh, maybe we'll see where they are for the actual race." I think that it's pretty confident. I'm pretty confident in saying that they were probably the fastest car on track all around at Daytona this year. I guess you could make an argument for the Porsche 963 in certain conditions, but I think BMW definitely was carrying the fight in the race, which maybe we weren't quite expecting, or at least I wasn't after the roar. So who knows? Maybe this is actually representative of what we'll see. I was going to say this coming weekend, but we're going to talk a little bit here. And the fact that this race is actually going to be during the work week for most of the country, or for most of the world.
Yeah, that's gonna be interesting to be watching some racing. I mean, this has happened in the past, right? No.
Well, yes. With Sebring, it's happened a few times with the
Yeah,
WEC.
Sebring raced on a Friday, right?
Yeah, as recently as 2023. So it hasn't. This is far from a foreign concept for the World Endurance Championship. Of course, this is sort of an exception year with the start of Ramadan over in Qatar. Make of it what you will. I'm certainly not thrilled about it. Mainly because if you do the adjustment for where you and I are in the East Coast, it is 6 o'clock in the morning on Friday, which is a working day for you and I. So
yep.
We will, I'm not going to make any promises. I really hope my boss isn't watching this podcast, but we'll try to sneak in some watching here and there. But it's going to be a race that ends around 4 p.m. for you and I, which, definitely not the most ideal situation.
Conveniently covers most of the workday.
Yeah. I mean, I suppose I'll get an early start to the morning for work. How about that? I mean, if I get to wake up at 6 a.m. to watch the start of the race anyways, I might as well just start the day early and then maybe log off an hour or two early.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a plan. That's a plan.
Yeah. Couple other takeaways, though, I want to talk about from the prologue. First thing off here, of course, most eyes are going to be on the Aston Martin Valkyrie. New car here this year, V12 engine, naturally aspirated. We've been hyping this car up since it was announced, re-announced a couple of years, but no, not really a couple of years back. Last year is when we really started to get indication that this program would be coming back. Not the most incredible session for them, we'll say. Again, this is only testing. I didn't hear any reported issues with that car, which is certainly a positive. But of the 18 hypercars that we saw on track, they ended out the combined sessions 15th and 17th out of 18. So, it's a stable start for them. I certainly wasn't expecting that car to be chart topping to start the WEC season, nor do I expect them to be quite there in the race either. We saw this with Lamborghini last year. Mm-hmm. We saw this even with a car as dominant as the Porsche 963 at the start of 2023, that car took some time to get up to speed. So I think that that's probably where you're going to expect Aston Martin to be with that car. Really, for me, this is going to be a race. If they can survive the 10-ish hours that this race goes on, provided that it doesn't go to that time certain 10-hour cap, that's a successful story for them. They're going to have 2 cars on track. They're going to pull a lot of data out of it. And then they're going to be ready to start that IMSA run that they have in Sebring in a few weeks' time.
Yeah, and I mean, already some positives for Aston Martin to take away from the prologue is, they got a fair number of laps in. They obviously didn't have any catastrophic issues with the car. So they got laps under their belts, and that's what their goal is going to be this season, right? You alluded to it exactly there, that this is going to be like Lamborghini maybe last year. Although the second car is certainly going to help provide them more data, hopefully to get up to speed a little bit more quickly, maybe start to show some pace by the end of the year. I think you alluded to it as well, kind of like Porsche did a couple of years ago. They started to show some pace towards the end of that first year in the hypercar class. So they're going to have a lot of eyes on them, and they're probably not going to come away with some incredible results right off the bat. But the Aston Martin, at least it's going to be on track, and you're going to be able to hear it. That's for sure.
Well, that's the real thing, isn't it? If this car survives the entire 10-hour race and then follows it up with a 12-hour race at Sebring, that's 22 hours of combined running of ear-bleeding V12s. So provided that the car doesn't actually retire or have any catastrophic issue, then fans are going to get to hear plenty of that V12 to start the season here.
And like we alluded to it, it's just testing. But in that last test session, they were 2 seconds off the fastest. Like their fastest lap of the session was 2 seconds off, BMW's quickest lap. BMW, who has a few years under their belts with this car now, or coming into their third season. Cadillac up there with plenty of experience now as well. Like that's a performance gap that you can close that, and there's going to be growing pains with the car. So overall, this is a positive weekend for Aston Martin.
Yeah. You talked about how competitive the top of the sheets were for the hypercars here. And again, let's put both hands up. It's only testing. Let's not read too far into it quite yet. I do want to talk about Peugeot with the 9X8. 12th and 16th in the combined results for them at the prologue. This is a car that's now going into its 4th season, not its 4th full season. It started halfway through the 2022 season, but it is the second oldest car in the class now, apart from the Toyota. I guess there's a little caveat with that, with the pretty large scale upgrades they had for that car to start 2024.
Yep.
But the base car underneath it is still the same that we had in 2022. When are we going to see this car really shine is the question I want to bring forward. And I'm hoping that the times that we saw from them in testing aren't too indicative, because right now they're just mid-pack. There's nothing too special to say about them. And to me, that's concerning, because of how long this car has been around, because of the wide-scale upgrades that they did with this car last year. We've sort of pushed the goalpost for that team quite a bit in recent years. With 2023, it was, well, this concept's not really working out, but there's definitely some pace underneath to be discovered there. Start of last year, we said, all right, well, this is a new concept with the car. They have a rear wing now. Design's pretty new compared to what they started the season with. Towards the end of the year, they started to get a little bit better results. They got a podium in Bahrain, albeit that was sort of don't really want to say a fluke podium, but it definitely came their way due to ill reliability from some of the other teams. If this is sort of representative of what we'll see from them this season, it does start to worry me, because you have a car now that, as it is in its 4th season, doesn't really have any amazing results to show for it. So I'm hoping that this isn't really what we're going to see out of that team this year with that car. To be honest with you, I've always sort of worried with Peugeot that maybe they're the second team or the second manufacturer that would sort of go out the door after Lamborghini, at least in the World Endurance Championship. That is complete speculation. I will say that outright. But we talked in the last episode when we were talking about Mustang joining Ford joining the series in the prototype ranks, how influential board meeting decisions are in sports car racing. And I do worry a little bit from that perspective, seeing the results that they've shown the past few seasons, and especially if they sort of carry on with those results this year, what that might mean for the future of that program.
Yeah, you're right. It could be a rocky little go of it for them if they don't start to put results on the board, because ultimately, like the boardroom decision makers, they just want to see results at the end of the day. They want to be able to see something that they can, take and market off of that for the brand. Like, ultimately, I mean, this is a very expensive marketing play for for manufacturers. So I have trouble giving the 9X8 a hard time right now, because this current iteration of the car hasn't even completed a trip around the sun yet, right? Like, this race last year, we're coming up to the final race for that, wingless wonder that was that initial 9X8. And then from the rest of the season on, they were adjusting to a new car. So maybe they deserve a little bit of a break adjusting the massive number of adjustments they would have to do. It's technically, I guess, not an entirely new car, but vastly different than the previous version that they were running. So that being said, I mean, all things considered, you need to start to show results in year 2 if you want to even say that was the first season last year for that car, and for them to understand, like, year 2, you have to start putting it all together. So this is a big year, for Peugeot, for that 9X8, and if that program will continue, you alluded to it. Could they be the second manufacturer out? There are plenty of manufacturers that are waiting on the doorstep, and have stated that they're coming, or there are some that are extremely close to formalizing their commitment to either the Hypercar or the LMDH formula. Like, they will be there happy to take the spot of that 9X8 if it comes to be. So we said it. It's a big year for the 9X8. They have to start to show results, and they have a solid lineup of drivers. They have the pieces there to do it. Now it's just they have to start putting it all together with some good race results.
Yeah, I think that's really just what it boils down to for me. And again, I've said it 5 times now, but testing. I'm just going to hope race weekend rolls around. We see them a little bit more competitive. They were a little bit over a second off the pace of the 20 BMW in the combined results. So provided they don't carry that with them throughout the rest of the weekend, hopefully that's an ill-made point. Moving to...
I just before we move off of Hypercar, because I assume you were going to move to LMGT3, right?
Yep.
Yeah. Before we move off of Hypercar, I do think it's something to acknowledge. Again, it's just testing, but it's something to acknowledge the pace that Cadillac showed this weekend.
Yeah,
they were near the top of the charts in virtually all of the sessions. They're right up there in the final fastest laps of the weekend. Again, it's testing. We don't want to blow it out of the water, but this is the weekend that, that team and that manufacturer, they needed to put down to sort of announce themselves as, what, we're not here to mess around this year. We're here. This is like, we are going to contend for race wins. And I thought Cadillac, right up there with the likes of Ferrari. We know the success that they've had, beating out Porsche in many of the sessions as well. Who Porsche didn't show incredible pace again. It's just testing, but will be something to watch when the official sessions start up very shortly. But I did want to shout out Cadillac for an impressive weekend that they had.
Yeah, and I'll just add on to that a little bit because this is a big year for Cadillac as well.
Yeah.
New team behind them, a race-winning team in the hypercar class already in Jota. And for a manufacturer that, let's be honest, we were just talking about disappointing results for Peugeot. Cadillac's results have also, I would argue, have been disappointing in the World Endurance Championship.
Yeah.
They've certainly had better results, but the reality is they haven't picked up a race win yet. And the past couple of years with that car in the championship have been in the form of just Ganassi running one car. Now we're going to be seeing two cars full time, again, with that race winning team. I think, I said this before in a previous episode, but I think Jota is going to be a team that you can legitimately look at as a championship contender.
Yeah.
If that's the case, though, they're going to have to start winning races at some point this season, whether that's race one or just later on down the road. But they're going to have to not only do that, they're going to have to be consistent as well.
Yeah.
So what we're seeing from them already, getting that strong right off the bat, I think is going to be the start of a pretty strong run for that Hertz Team Jota Cadillac program.
Yep. I agree 100%.
So now I do want to move to the LMGT3 class, just go over a couple of the top three from the combined results, and then I'll go back. I saw somebody in the chat wanted me to go over the results from each of the four sessions, so I'll hit the top three from each of those individually. But it was Vista AF Corsa with the Ferrari 296 GT3, or LMGT3 if we're going to be technical, in this championship, that were the two fastest cars, car 21 over car 54. Another car that was a little surprising to me last year, wasn't quite as competitive as I thought it would be. I mean, we know the 296 to be a very competitive car in the worldwide GT3 racing scene. That team last year, Vista, of course, it just wasn't quite as up to bat as I expected them to be. I think I picked them at least on a couple occasions last year as my pick to win the race. Again, depending on how much you want to read into it, looks like they're trying to turn the tables around a little bit this year. But that was all followed up by the 27 Heart of Racing. Of course, we're going to be talking about them a lot in the prototype ranks, but they are still continuing in LMGT3 with that Aston Martin Vantage. Ian James, Zachary Robichon, and Mattia Drudi in that car, rounding out the top three there.
Yeah. It's honestly, over the course of the week, the LMGT3 class or over the course of the weekend, I guess, is what turned my head a little bit more than the hypercar ranks. Consistently up near the top of the standings in LMGT3 were the Lexus, or what do we determine, the Lexi, for plural,
whatever you call it.
But they looked competitive again over the week. We alluded to some of the hypercars that have struggled a little bit in their young lives. But a Kotis and that Lexus, it was a tough year last year. There's no way to sugarcoat it. Never really had a good breakout race, and if it looked like one was brewing for them, something went wrong in the late going. And it looks like, again, it's just testing. Take it with a grain of salt, but they were consistently near the top of the charts throughout all four sessions. They got, again, a large number of laps in, which is, you love to see that as well. I mean, not that there's anything to prove with the reliability of this car. It's been around forever, but a Kotis being near the top of the LMGT3 ranks all weekend was definitely a bit of an eye-opener for me.
Yeah, well, I mean, Lexus and Kotis, they really turned the results around in the second half of last year. The first half definitely was a disappointment. As you mentioned, it took them a long time to even get points for both cars on the board. And one of the two cars last year only had 1 point after a few races in the season. The other thing you need to remember, though, is for last year, this was a new car for Akotas ASP. That's a long-time Mercedes team switching over to a car they were unfamiliar with. And also, might I add, the oldest car in the WEC class by far, apart from Le Mans when we have the Oreca 07s on the grid as well, which also debuted in 2017. If I'm not mistaken and nothing gets delayed, this should be the final year for that car, that RCF GT3 in the World Endurance Championship. So I think we'll see more out of them this year. We definitely saw them starting to turn those results around at the latter half of last season. So yeah, I'll definitely agree with what you said there.
Yeah. And I guess the only other note from the running in the prologue was just sort of unfortunate for the 77 Proton. That car caught fire. I believe it was on day 1 in the first session.
Yep.
And I don't believe that they got any further laps under their belt after that incident took place. So a rough weekend for Proton. Proton, of course, has plenty of experience. Well, they have a reasonable amount of experience with that Mustang GT3, but not some. I guess it's better that it happened in testing than during the race weekend. But they might be a little bit behind the 8 ball compared to some of the other LMGT3 teams heading into this week's race, especially with a tighter turnaround than normal as well, with the race being held on a Friday.
Yeah, I'm trying to think, actually, is that the first real significant issue we've seen with that Ford Mustang GT3 car?
Didn't both of them catch on fire at Bahrain last year? Was that race?
Oh, perhaps.
Yeah.
I
feel like
season's made my mind foggy.
I feel like at least one of them might have caught on fire there.
Yeah, I can't recall. Somebody.
But if you are racing one of those Mustangs, you have to be happy with the results that you saw them just turn out at the Rolex, right?
Sure.
Double podium finish. That's it's got to be a pretty, in the Ford camp, you have to be going into this season, looking to build on last year, and it's not great to have one car catch fire before the season even begins. But it could be worse. Like I said, it could have been when practice for the race gets underway, which it wasn't. So
hey, as you said, if you believe in bad luck, get that bad luck out of the way before the season officially starts.
Exactly.
And maybe that's where their luck turns around. So I will go over the top 3 for both classes for all 4 sessions that we had between Saturday and Sunday. In the first testing session, it was the 83, the privateer Ferrari 499P, of course, the yellow Ferrari that we've seen pick up a race win last year at COTA over the Cadillac. It's going to be a recurring trend here a little bit. The number 12 Hertz Team Jota Cadillac, good 0.3 back. And then the 51 factory Ferrari, of course, entry over in the LMGT3 class. Well, that's where we saw a chart-topping session from the Lexus. The 78 Akotas ASP Lexus did lead that opening session of the season, followed by the 33 TF Sport Corvette and the 54 Vista AF Corsa Ferrari 296. Again, about 0.3 back from that Lexus. Second session, this is where we saw even stronger results from Cadillac and from Jota. It was a 1-2 for that team, number 12 over car number 38. Both of them separated by about 0.2, and again, followed by the 50 Ferrari from last year, who, might I add, we were talking earlier about Jota and their consistency and their fight for a championship. Ferrari, of course, is really vying for the championship this year. They've picked up a Le Mans win twice now on the trot. They're going to want to back that up with a championship. That car has been pretty consistent last year, especially. They didn't really struggle with consistency as much as they were in the 2023 season. They were a contender for that championship towards the end of the year last year, fell a little bit short to Porsche and Toyota. But nonetheless, I think this is a season where if they can get off to a decent start in those first couple of races, we know how strong they're probably going to be at Le Mans again this year. Perhaps we see that championship run for the third season of that 499P. In the LMGT3 class, another strong session for the Akotis Lexus. Again, car 87 over the 33 TF Sport Corvette again, and the 21 Vista, of course, a Ferrari this time. And in the third practice session, or third testing session, this is where we saw Porsche sort of return to what we expected to see from them from last year. Porsche Penske, car 6, the with a 140.428 over the two Ferraris, car 51 over car 50. And then I feel like I'm repeating myself a lot here because in LMGT3, the 33 TF Sport Corvette led that session over the 54 Vista AF Corsa Ferrari. And in third place again, in the top three again, rather, is the 78 Lexus, continuing with that consistency. I think the top three, the top three teams have been the same across the first three sessions in LMGT3. Just had the different AF Corsa Ferrari between the sessions there. Finally, in the fourth session, this is where we really started to see some of those quick times roll in. This is where BMW set that top time from the weekend, car 20, Team WRT, over the 38 Cadillac this time, and the 83, again, customer, in quotes, Ferrari, closing out the top three for a pretty consistent showing from Ferrari there. And then finally, this is where Vista AF Corsa was really also able to pull ahead in the LMGT3 class with that 1-2. Car 21 over 54, as I mentioned earlier, and car 27, that Heart of Racing Aston Martin, picking up third as they stood in the combined results. So I'll tell you what, Stu, what did I say? We're going to spend a few minutes talking about testing because testing doesn't matter, and I think we spent a half hour talking about it. So that's typical. That's par for the course on this show. Do want to talk a little bit more just general things I'm looking forward to for this year. And of course, I'm sure you're going to have some things to throw on here as well. One of those things that we touched on a little bit earlier, but of course I'm going to bring it up again, that Aston Martin Valkyrie, the debut of that car here. As we mentioned earlier, I'm not expecting anything incredible from them, at least for the first half of this season. Really what they're going to want are reliable results. That's the first road car-based hypercar that we've seen in the class, which is really something that was pitched as a sort of a unique point to these hypercar regulations, is you can have a road car-based prototype on the grid. Really different from what we've seen from some of those other top manufacturers on the grid. And I'm really excited to see how that car progresses throughout the season. And of course, that V12 engine, I'm going to talk about it every single time. Really looking forward to hearing it in person at Sebring in a few weeks, but it's guaranteed to be a fan favorite. That car is loud officially compared to where it was at Daytona testing, where it was run with pretty significant mufflers on the car. Now it's really out on track screaming and battling with that Cadillac in the sound department, I'd say. But that's a big one for me. I'm also interested to see how they stack up compared to that IMSA car. Of course, it's the same team that we'll be seeing there, but the BOP between IMSA and the WEC is going to be a little bit different. We are going to see carryover in the driver department with those IMSA drivers moving over to the World Endurance Championship for some of those longer races, which they will be present at Qatar. But interested to see if there's some disparity there between their performance in the WEC and in IMSA. Of course, that car coming over to IMSA, I'm sure you have some comments as well to throw on for it.
Yeah, I mean, I know we're focusing mostly on the WEC side of things today, but it is going to be interesting to see how the BOP kind of plays out with the first hypercar that's going to take to the track in IMSA competition. The the first years of the GTP and the LMDH regulations now have only featured the LMDH cars. So, and I think for the most part, IMSA has done a really, really, really good job of managing BOP among those cars. So it's a bit of a new BOP sort of table to look at this year, and of course the introduction of the hypercar, is going to, I'm sure, affect some things on IMSA, the IMSA side of things, the technical side of things on how they're managing BOP. But yeah, I think that's going to be interesting to watch and see if they can maintain the high level and the high bar that I think they've set from the opening couple seasons of the LMDH regulations.
Yeah, definitely. And the other big thing for me, really, with the hypercar class is just going to be that battle for the championship. This is now a season where, with the exception of Aston Martin, every single manufacturer on the grid has a lot of maturity right now. BMW, this is their second season on the grid. They're already looking pretty strong. We know Team WRT is going to be really fighting for race wins and that championship. We were talking earlier about Hertz Team Jota, how strong they seem to be right off the bat with Cadillac, as I would expect them to be. Ferrari, yeah. I talked about them a few minutes ago. I think they're going to be really heavily fighting for that championship this season. They've just fallen a little bit short the past couple of years. Of course, Toyota as well. Toyota, we've sort of not forgotten about Toyota, but they've been quiet the last couple the last year in particular. In 2023, they were really a dominant team. But last year they were one of those quieter teams, but they won the Drivers' Championship with that car. So we can't really forget how competitive they still are. And although the prologue didn't really show anything incredible for them, they also got off to a slow start last year at this track. I'm definitely not discounting Toyota's consistency that they've shown in the past, and just how much knowledge they have with that car now. Perhaps they're in the championship fight again to try to steal the manufacturers back away from Porsche. Alpine as well this year. I don't know if Alpine is quite at the same level as, say, like a Cadillac or a Ferrari or a Toyota or a Porsche, certainly. But they've had some Evo upgrades added to that car for this season. Reliability was a little bit of a struggle for them last year at certain races. If they're able to turn that around, we saw that car was quick, ended up on the podium a couple times last year. And I wouldn't be surprised if we see a race win, at least one race win out of that car this year. I think this is a pretty open bag here. There's not really a single manufacturer, with the exception of, I guess, Aston, who you would expect to take some time to get up to speed. And also, ultimately, I'd throw the 9X8 into that same bag as well.
Yeah.
If they can't turn things around. I think the rest of the manufacturers and teams we have on the grid, though, it's pretty wide open for making an early championship prediction in that class.
Yep. Yeah, and Mohammed, yes.
Thanks for correcting
Toyota,
me.
Yeah, Toyota won the
I was thinking in my head I got that wrong. Yep, thanks.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you nailed it right there. Like, the only manufacturer that you are not expecting to really be in the hunt is Aston Martin. Peugeot, they still have some catching up to do, potentially, or arguably, but every one of these other manufacturers expects to be winning races this year. They expect to be fighting for podiums every single race, and obviously there are going to be some of them that fall short of those expectations. Is it going to be somebody like an Alpine that that showed strong pace at times last year, but just kind of fails to take that extra step? Is it going to be an aging Toyota that kind of slips a little bit further behind some of the newer cars that have been introduced? Or is Cadillac truly going to break out in the way that we've seen kind of glimpses of potential over the past couple of years, but have never really taken that big step? There's there are a lot to watch. There's a lot of stories to watch for on the manufacturer side as well as on the team side in this hypercar class. And yeah, it's, race one of the season is going to be the first opportunity for these teams and drivers and manufacturers to prove if they're legit or if there's still plenty of work that they need to do to get to that level.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with everything you said there. And I'll move things over to the LMGT3 class now because there's one key standout I have in that class, which is really Porsche. Extremely dominant last year performance we
Yep.
saw from Manthey Racing. Of course, this year, that Porsche two-car program looks a little bit different. We have the car number 92 sort of taking on a different look from last year. None of the drivers in that championship winning car returning from last year to that lineup. And car 85, of course, is now taken over by the Iron Dames, which is still going to be a Manthey run effort. But a very different appearance for that Porsche effort. And I'm curious if it's going to change what their championship fight looks like. Of course, we mentioned you couldn't really stop them last year, especially in the first half of the season. They were pretty much untouchable. Car 92, though, this year, Ryan Hardwick, Richard Leitz, and Pera are just a new driver lineup to that car. Richard Leitz coming over from car number 91 last year. And, of course, the 85 Iron Dames was running a Lamborghini last year. It's a new look for that team, I would say.
Yeah.
And I'm just sort of curious if they're able to back up that championship run they had last year. I also think the LMGT3 class is going to be a lot more open than it was last year.
Yeah.
First couple races down last year, I think we sort of were able to pick out Manthey and WRT as the two favorites. But as the season progressed, I mean, pretty much after Le Mans last year, the championship was already looking like it was going to be a little bit of a struggle to catch up to Manthey. And I think this year is going to be a lot more open in that class. I'm looking through what we saw at the prologue. I'm looking at some of the driver changes that we had across that class. I certainly think this is going to be a little bit more of a competitive season for that second year of LMGT3.
Yeah.
And
There's
we
some.
have.
Go
Go
ahead.
ahead. I was going to
Oh,
say we have the addition of Mercedes as well as a new
yeah.
manufacturer on the grid with the Iron Lynx, who's switching over from that Lamborghini program last year.
Yeah, took the words right out of my mouth there. Is, in addition to, some driver movement, some team movement, on, manufacturers that they're running, we have Mercedes as an addition in this class. The first time that we're going to see, that AMG on the WEC grid. So that's going to be great to see. This is a car that's won everything that there is to win in, GT3 racing worldwide. It's a very well traveled car, and now it gets to try its hand at the WEC and see what it can do here with, again, a team that knows how to win in the WEC in Iron Lynx. They have some solid driver lineups as well. They're going to be one to keep an eye on in this class. And as you kind of alluded to, we were talking about it in the prologue that, Lexus, probably without a doubt, one of, if not the slowest cars in this class last year, finished right in the basement of the championship standings. I actually pulled them up. They finished 16th and 18th in the championship last year, and already showing good pace. Again, it's just testing, whatever. But showing that really good pace in testing. We're LMGT3, the racing, we can sometimes forget about it a little bit, how good it is, because we're so focused on the hypercars, or in IMSA, very focused on the GTP class cars. But the LMGT3 classes provided us some great racing last year. And if how those couple days of testing are anything to go off of, then I think we're going to be in for a very good year of LMGT3 as well this year, especially if, Corvette, Ford take some steps forward in with their second season for for those cars to add on to, Porsche, Ferrari, McLaren, and how strong they have looked.
Yeah, you mentioned specifically Corvette there.
Yeah.
Of course, we've seen what they've been able to do with that car as time has gone by in IMSA. They were also strong at Bahrain last year in the World Endurance Championship. I look at them; they're a team that was consistently in the top 3 for the prologue testing. Maybe we look at them as a team that's in the championship fight this year. I really don't even want to talk too much into that right now because we're talking off testing times alone.
Yeah.
And we've spent the past 10 minutes talking about how open both of these classes we think are going to be this year. So it's easy for me to throw 15 darts at the board and say, yeah, they're a championship contender this year. So I'm sort of reducing the value of those predictions every single time I add a new one. But yeah, I'm definitely going to be looking at them as one of those teams this year to have some standout results. And Lexus, as you mentioned, I would agree 100%. They were definitely if we have to pick a worse manufacturer in the class last year, I would say it was definitely Lexus. And despite the fact that they were able to pick up some performance at the end of last year, weren't really there just simply wasn't enough time at the end of the year to turn those results from the first half around. If they can start off the first half this year, who knows?
Who knows?
All right. I think that's officially enough to discuss specifically around, because, we kept touching on the prologue there. Gave a couple thoughts for what we are looking for in the season. Is there anything else you wanted to touch on before I move to just a new piece of regulations we had for this season?
Well, do we want to pick our class winners for this weekend?
I will pick. I was going to come back to those at the end.
Okay, we'll come back to those at the end then.
Yeah.
I'm just getting excited.
Keep it in the back of your head. You got plenty of time to switch your picks here if you want to do that. There is a new regulation that was introduced. Actually, this just came out today, I believe. Formally announced that there is a new weight ballast system in the class or in the championship for both Hypercar and LMGT3, specifically related to the driver's weight. This is something we had heard rumblings about before. I think this was brought up first at some point last year. We've heard this brought up in racing disciplines for decades now. I mean, the topic of driver weight and it being some drivers having an unfair advantage for being significantly lighter than others has been brought up many times across Formula One, IndyCar, all sorts of racing disciplines. Well, the World Endurance Championship is doing something about it this year. They are introducing an 82 kilogram sort of baseline weight average across the 3 driver lineups for each car, or I guess 2 for some of those teams that'll have 2 drivers for some of the shorter races. Essentially, it's a very simple system. If the average weight of the drivers taken before the race is underneath that 82 kilogram average, they will add ballast or just added weight into the car in strategic spots to sort of bring that car up to the same level that everybody else would be running. This is really just, I'll say a bit of a safety measure. We've seen drivers in recent years go to extreme lengths, especially with those fully factory hypercar programs where weighing a few kilograms more can be the difference between a couple tenths at a track as long as Le Mans. And of course, multiply that over the course of many hours of potential green flag running. This is really just sort of neutralizing all of that. There's different ways you can look at this. You can look at it from a purity standpoint and say, well, this is something we didn't have to worry about a while ago, and now it's something new that's being added on. There's definitely an argument you can have there. Me personally, as somebody who is a pretty avid traditionalist, I'll say, in racing, I'm not really a huge fan of when change rolls around. I don't really have a problem with it. It's not going to affect anything for the viewers of the series. The actual balancing that it's going to have for the cars is going to be so minimal that it's really not going to have any sizable impact for the actual racing product we have on track. But just something worth noting that will be starting this weekend at Qatar and continuing throughout the rest of the season.
I mean, ultimately, it's a safety improvement, right?
Right.
It's you don't want to have drivers basically starving themselves when really they need to be in shape to do a 24-hour race, do 8, 9, 10 hours of a 24-hour race, or be out for 8 hours in Bahrain, or another climate that's not exactly very enjoyable, for the human body to be put into a very I guess strained state. So yeah, it's a safety improvement at the end of the year. Dub just mentioned it. James Collado had a faint spell last year. That's the driver that's the instance that really rings through to me,
Yeah.
hearing from last year, and just the extremes that the drivers are going to try and meet a certain weight. So yeah, there's a reason why it's being put into more motorsports, around the world, and not just in the WEC. It's a safety improvement at the end of the day, and one that I'm happy is being adopted. Yeah, we're not going to see performance really affected by this.
Yeah. Just a couple more details on the technical aspects behind it. Already mentioned all three drivers' weights will be recorded before the race. They'll also be taken again at the end of the race. This is similar to what you'll see in like Formula One. You'll see the drivers jump onto a scale right at the end, right before they get interviewed at the end of the race. There is some leeway in there in the regulations to account for obvious weight loss that comes associated with driving a car for that long. But if you happen to fall outside of that discrepancy, then there would be a penalty assigned to that car after the race. So pretty minor improvement, I would say, for this year, or a pretty minor change overall, but definitely an improvement from a driver standpoint. And again, I don't think you're going to see this really play a hand too much this year. I would certainly hope we don't see any large scale impact in any race results that come out of this in the form of any post-race penalties. But just something, of course, worth noting since it is new for the championship this year.
Yep.
Of course, another thing we have new this year, something you threw on the notes, were the new driver panels that we have in the World Endurance Championship. These are something that we've seen in IMSA for, a good decade now? I can't remember when IMSA introduced those, but we've had them for a very long time. Just showing the position of the car on track. They also show the pit time, the refueling or energy replenishment rate, or time in the pits, if you want to get technical nowadays. In the World Endurance Championship, this is new. It's replacing the leader light system that we've been familiar with in the past. The panel itself, I would note, is number one, larger than what they have in IMSA. It's wider.
Yes.
Also, perhaps a little bit taller. I don't have the exact measurements on it. But also higher resolution as well. The LEDs that they have on these boards, there's a lot more LEDs than they have on the IMSA boards. So what that allows is just a little bit more information to be shown on them. I've seen some uses of this already. We've seen some pictures come out of the prologue where these number boards are on all of the cars. Pretty large font showing the position of the car. Of course, it's showing the pit stop time as well, like we've seen in IMSA. The other thing I've seen these boards used for, and actually something that I think is pretty useful, is the energy amount that the cars have left as well, the stint energy. We've seen these on the TV graphics in the WEC recently. I know IMSA TV has also picked them up starting last year as well, where they'll show you the percentage of energy remaining. I saw in the prologue on one of the LMGT3 cars, I forget which one, I believe it might have been the Aston. It showed how much energy was left, just in the form of a bar. It wasn't showing an actual percentage, but it gives you a general idea of how much time that car has left on track before it'll leave the pit again. And of course, with this being a brand new system, there's plenty of time for them to tweak and refine that if they want to make it a little bit more descriptive or want to put a percentage on that. I think a percentage would probably be a little bit more helpful than the colored bars that we've seen on the TV graphics. But I don't know. There's definitely some mixed feelings on this. I know Only Endurance put up a thread on social media sort of asking people what they thought about it. I know Tim Fulbrick over there was saying he wasn't a fan of it. Some of the photographers and videographers in the series are chiming in as well to say that they think it makes the cars look uglier than they were last year. Stu, you were the one who put this on our notes, though, so I'll let you give your official thoughts on it first.
Well, I want to hear your thoughts on them too after, because you commented on said post. So
I did do that.
Yeah. My thoughts on them. I do think that I agree that they're pretty ugly. You mentioned that they are larger than the ones that they run in IMSA. I do have some issues with the ones that are running IMSA though, because sometimes they're so small, and the LEDs are not great on them. It can be difficult to see what it says when a car is flying by. So a larger one, I understand it. It really, especially when you get some of the numbers on it are so large, it does overwhelm a little bit. One of the things that I do like about the IMSA ones compared to these new WEC ones, though, are there's a large number of cars in IMSA that actually have that panel sort of in one of the side windows, which isn't as intrusive, I think, to the car and the overall appearance of the car. Based on all the photos that I've seen, it seems like the WEC is kind of mandating all of the cars look very, very similar in the position with their number, and now this number panel. But yeah, I mean, as with change, we'll get used to it, and we probably won't really notice them that much in 6 months. We'll be able to look past it, but it is definitely a little bit of a shock to see the first few times that you see the photos of it.
Yeah, and what I would say about it is, look, from a fan perspective, definite upgrade. When you're trackside, it's going to be very helpful to have that information that you otherwise wouldn't know unless you were either A, looking at a TV screen, or B, looking at information on your phone.
That you don't often have very good connection to, because...
Right. If it's the start of the 24 hours of Le Mans, I'll promise you won't have a good cell connection. I know that from experience, and I also know that at Daytona as well. That race has been getting so crowded recent years that hasn't been 100% reliable either. But nonetheless, no, I mean, I've used the IMSA number panels plenty of times, especially in the nighttime hours where they're a little bit easier to read. They're very helpful to just get a general idea of what's going on in the race. You know, you can generally pick up on a car, and if you'll see the number board go from a car that was running in like 4th, and then 20 minutes later they're running in 12th, you're probably going to notice that. So those are some things that I've picked up at IMSA races over the years that, they're definitely helpful from an at-the-track experience. I guess my only gripe with it is that it's sort of hindered the freedom that teams have with the livery design. Actually, a good indication of this came from Dakin's Designs over on X, who posted. He's the one who designed the FAF liveries, amongst a few other cars, I believe, in IMSA potentially. AWA, but I know he also designed the FAF plaid Lamborghini, not Lamborghini, Lamborghini this year, and the McLaren last year.
Yeah.
That's been quite a fan favorite, was saying how much of a struggle it is for livery design when you have not only that as a requirement, but you also have the class name stickers has to be shown on the side of the car. The class number board is mandatory as well. So all of those things from a designer perspective, it sort of limits what they're able to do. I will say, I guess on record, not that it really matters, I kind of think the liveries for this year across the board mostly are a little bit uglier than last year in the WEC. I don't know if that's all due to the number board placement. I know on some of the cars, like especially the WRT BMWs, the number board looks lower than I would expect it to be.
Mm.
I don't know if that's because of the new LED board on the side of the car or not, but that's the only negative I would really say about it. I think otherwise you can say maybe we don't need to say sixth on the side of the car instead of just putting a large number 6 on it.
Yeah.
When we get that nitpicky, I'll say one thing, and that's if we're complaining about these tiny details, then sports car racing is in a really good place because
Yeah.
we're really nitpicking nowadays, and I
Yeah.
think that's a good indication of how good things actually are.
But you know what? We just talked about it though, that sometimes the IMSA ones are a little bit hard to read. It's a bit of a smaller one. If we can't read the number all the time on the IMSA, you're not reading the TH in sixth or the RD in third. You know,
Yeah, I mean,
it's maybe yeah. That might be a good simple fix would be to just get rid of that. But yeah, we're nitpicking a little bit.
yeah. I don't know. I would say that's all I really have to comment on for the number panels, but I guess I can bring us to our predictions, and then we'll get to some questions. I want to let you take the first one of the year for the World Endurance Championship. I feel like I might have gone first for the IMSA predictions, but I can't remember. But I'll start with you for Hypercar. I want to hear out of you.
So Hypercar, again, this is the year that we turn it around with the predictions. Last year, bit of a rocky go, but 2025 is a new year, and I think our predictions are going to be spot on all year long. You heard it here first. First prediction for the year, Hypercar winner, give me the number 51 Ferrari. Going with a little bit of a mix of, previous speed and, obviously showed really strong pace last year. We're in contention for the championship until sort of the very end of the season. Maybe a little bit of a step back from Porsche especially. But I think Ferrari, this 51 entry, Alessandro Perguidi, James Collado, Antonio Giovinazzi, a driver lineup. They've won together. This is a car that, again, Ferrari, they've won Le Mans. That's a huge check, but now they're going to want more. They're going to still want to keep pushing the envelope of what the performance in that 499P can do. Give me the number 51 Ferrari to come out of the starting blocks strong in Qatar with a race win.
I like it because it's not the car I picked.
Perfect.
Which is what I was fearing for. I've stolen your picks many a times, which is why I gave you that one first today. Maybe there's a chance I do in LMGT3 though. I'll tell you who I like. I've talked about it multiple times already this show. I like Cadillac Hertz Team Jota. Right off the bat. They were very strong in the prologue testing. I already expected them to be strong before we even turned the calendar over to 2025. If I had to pick one over the other, I guess I would pick the 38. You sort of have a combined lineup there of some Jota talent from last year. You also have the addition of Earl Bamber from the Ganassi Cadillac program in the WEC and Bourdais from the IMSA Cadillac program with Ganassi last year. That's a very capable driver lineup in that car. So I'm going to pick the 38 here. I think it can really go either way, but give me that Jota not 963, that Jota Cadillac V Series R. If you want to talk about the Jota 963 though, let's remember that car, the number 12 car, finished second at Qatar in this race last year. So although it's a different car for that team,
true.
Just need one more position higher up this year.
That's true. And for those of you wondering who won this race last year, it was Toyota that took the win. So
it was not.
Oh, what?
It was Porsche.
Oh, did I look at the wrong? I looked at the wrong race, didn't I? Guys, I'm in mid-season form.
Yeah.
I said that
preseason
confidently
form,
too.
Yeah, we're like that Proton Mustang. We're gonna get all these out of the way early.
Yeah. Well, yeah, or like our technical troubles earlier.
Oh, that's how about LMGT3? We talked earlier how wide open this class is. Again, I hate to do it because it's kind of cheap to look at testing times and be like, pick one from the top there. But I like the TF Sport Corvettes. I think they're going to be very competitive here. They've shown consistently being in the top three in the prologue testing. I think Car 33 is going to be the one I'd pick ultimately there. But yeah, I'll just leave it at that. Car 33 TF Sport Corvette picking up their first win in the World Endurance Championship.
Well, it didn't take long for you to pick snag my pick. That was the one that I had circled big time coming out of prologue testing. Again, you mentioned it, a strong lineup. Danny Hunkadea, Johnny Edgar, Ben Keating. Ben was beating some of the pro drivers. Like, Ben was putting up faster times than a fair number of the professional drivers during the prologue week. So again, it's testing, yada yada. Still impressive. Like, Ben Keating's recent track record in a Corvette in the WEC is pretty darn strong. It's difficult to go against that. But in the interest of having something to talk about here, I'm going to go with the 27 Heart of Racing Aston Martin. This was another team that, again, they showed strong pace in the prologue testing. But they also showed strong pace towards the end of last year. The Aston Martin had some strong showings in the late going. Heart of Racing has a lot on their plate right now, but they have a solid lineup of drivers here. Ian James is the bronze in this car. Zach Robichon, who I think is very underrated, especially as a silver. I think he can compete with some of the best silvers in the world. He's in that car, and the lineup is rounded out by Mattia Drudi. So a strong lineup of drivers. I think that the 27 can be right there with the 33 at the end of this race.
Yeah. You know what? I got to be honest with you. That was my alternative. That's the car I was looking at initially. And then I switched my mind to the TF Corvette at the last minute. So good minds think alike, I guess. We stole each other's picks.
Maybe.
It will both look like clowns when neither one of them finishes on the podium.
Yeah, exactly.
Time for a bonus pick. We like to do this just to give ourselves another chance at looking right, but usually we're not. I guess mine would be, I will predict we're not going to see a safety car in this race. No full course yellow. We had a very extended green flag run in this race last year, so much so that we were commenting about how dirty the racing line was with gravel at one point of the race last year because of how long the race went green. This is a track with a very long runoff area in all of the corners. It was initially designed for bike racing, so some of the track design reflects that. I think unless there's any major incident on track, we can get away with local yellows, and this might be a 10-hour race that goes the distance and actually goes underneath 10 hours as it did last year, and we actually get the full 1,812 kilometers completed.
True. That is, I hadn't thought about that as sort of a way to go with this prediction, but I like it. I think that's within the realm of possibility of happening here. There's a couple more cars on the grid this year than last year, right? Or with the loss of
actually one less.
One less, okay, because of the loss of Lamborghini and I guess Isotta. Yeah. Okay. I'm gonna go in a bit of a different direction. I'm gonna take a performance-based stab here, and I'm going to say that Lexus gets their first podium in LMGT3 this weekend. Talked about it when we were talking about some of the prologue results. They initially looked to have taken a solid step forward. They have some new drivers that have been brought into that program. Most notably, Ben Barnicoat. He's won a lot in IMSA. Going to bring a ton of experience to that car, to that team for this championship. I think that Lexus, they can come out of the gate strong here and pick up a podium in the LMGT3 class. Maybe a bit bold, but certainly not as bold as some of the predictions from last year. So give me a Lexus podium.
Yeah, I like it. I like it. They were very strong in the prologue, and another one of those consistent teams we were talking about
Yeah.
across the board in LMGT3 from those 4 sessions we had. So I wouldn't say that's too ambitious, but the unambitious picks are the ones that usually end up being right. So
That's true.
you gotta be picking one or the other.
We
All
couldn't just
right.
pick Manti all year last year. That would have been boring.
Well, maybe Manti podium would be an ambitious pick for this one.
You know what? It probably would be.
Time to wrap up the episode with some of your questions. Some of these questions from back earlier on in the episode. So sorry if you've been waiting well over an hour for us to answer these. First one from Adrian Prado. What do you think, or do you think the Valkyrie would be a podium contender in Qatar? Simple answer would be no. I wouldn't expect them to be, really. First on-track race in a real competition setting with that car. They got a lot of drive time with that car at the prologue, but this is really going to be an endurance challenge for them. It's a 10-hour-ish race. If they can make it the distance with both of those cars, especially, to me, that's really a win for them. I don't think they're going to have the ultimate pace of the other cars that we've seen on the grid. I'm hoping they're not too far off the mark. As they were in prologue testing, they were a couple seconds off the class leading times. But if they can reel that in a little bit and then just really have a consistent race where they don't run into any major issues, I think that's really more reasonable to expect from them. Podium would be very impressive if they're able to secure that.
Yeah, I think a win for the Valkyrie in Qatar would be both of those cars finishing the race, not having encountered any significant issues. That's, if that happens, Aston Martin's walking away from this pleased.
Yeah. Is it time for a Toyota GR020? I love this question because this was something I was thinking about yesterday. Where this Toyota GR010 has been around since 2021. It is, I was going to say the oldest car in the World Endurance Championship right now, but that award actually goes to the Lexus. Although technically, if you want to get technical, the GR010 has been running in the World Endurance Championship longer than the Lexus has, much longer. That car has had some Evo upgrades as time has gone on. It's a little bit different from where it was in 2021, but the main concept or the main base of the car remains the same. Let me put it this way. If you asked me this question a year ago, at this exact time, I would say no. That car was extremely dominant in 2023, with the exception of falling short at Le Mans. They won every single race in the 23 season. Last year, they were still manufacturers' champions. They're still able to extract great results out of that car. The real question to me becomes, what's the longevity for it? Because the formula has been extended through 2029 at this point. We were just talking last show. Wouldn't be surprised if they try to extend it even beyond that. You're not going to be at a point in 2029 where you're still going to be running the GR010.
Yeah.
So surely at some point Toyota would upgrade their car. We know they want to go racing in hydrogen with those hydrogen prototypes when they eventually come out. Sounds like potentially 2028 rollout for that right now. But they do want to race the standard petrol-powered hypercars alongside that. So I would expect, if I had to guess, an upgrade of that car to a new version maybe next year, maybe the following, but we haven't really heard anything significant in recent years. There were some rumblings about an upgrade coming potentially in 24 or 25. Those never really materialized, and I, to my knowledge, haven't heard anything about a successor of the GR010 really since.
We know that Toyota can be pretty hush hush about car developments and stuff as well. So maybe not terribly surprising, but as you were talking about this, next year seems like it would be a reasonable time to introduce an Evo. There's been plenty of new cars that have come on the grid. Toyota has to have realized that they're not the same at the same dominant level that they were a few years ago. And I wouldn't be shocked if over the summer we hear, news start to come into the cycle that Toyota is working on an Evo update. But of course, no indications of that at this point. But it just seems that would fit the timeline pretty nicely.
Well, actually, someone brought up in a message further down, how many Joker upgrades does Toyota have remaining?
Yeah.
And I don't know the number because generally speaking, we don't really know how many of these Joker tokens they've used to upgrade their car. Toyota has obviously been around and putting upgrades on that car longer than some of these other teams or some of these other manufacturers have. So I don't even know if they can really do an Evo of the GR010 without homologating an entirely new car, unless that's what you were implying.
Well, I thought, maybe I'm not remembering correctly, but I thought I remember when sort of these new regulations were introduced that they were maybe given an extra Joker sort of token. Maybe I'm misremembering that, or confusing it with something else, but I don't know. I feel like they must have some Jokers left, but there's not exactly a list out there that you can just pull up and look at all the Joker updates either.
Yeah, and that's the main issue. So
yeah.
Saw a question: how good is BMW's lineup? Having the fastest car doesn't mean a win. Definitely true. We saw that at Daytona, so you don't need any further indication of that. At least I would argue they were the fastest car at Daytona. In the World Endurance Championship, though, they definitely have a strong driver lineup. They have the addition of a new driver this year, though. Car 15, we have Dries Vanthoor, Raffaele Marciello, and Kevin Magnussen, of course, coming over from a Haas Formula One program, but also has some prototype racing experience previously with the Ganassi Cadillac DPIs over in IMSA. And then in car 20, you have Rene Rast, Robin Freins, and Sheldon Vanderlyn. So from me, no concerns from the driver lineup of those cars. You have a star-studded lineup of all platinum drivers. It's just, how are they going to hold up over the course of a season? We'll see. But to me, that's not really anything that stands out as a concern.
Yeah, you nailed it.
Formula Jonah in the chat saying, hey guys, great podcast once again. Looking forward to the upcoming Qatar 12 kilometers. Jonah, what's it going to be for you? Like 3 o'clock in the morning for a start? Have fun with that. At least you probably get to see more of it than we will, because by the time that race is over, I'll be probably stuck in a meeting somewhere. Will the FIA extend the hypercar regulations beyond 2029 as more manufacturers are showing interest? One of the main talking points from our last episode, I think we both came to the conclusion that they probably should. If they're whether or not they're actually considering that, I don't know. But I think it's definitely something they should consider, because we're at a point now where Genesis is coming to the World Endurance Championship next year. They'll be in IMSA the following year. Ford's going to be joining in a couple of years' time. We've heard heavy rumors that McLaren will be announcing a program soon, which would also be on track in 2027, potentially 2028 in IMSA. And then the name of Mercedes has also been thrown around a little bit recently. So we have plenty of interest coming in still. A lot of these manufacturers are going to have cars that are only 2-3 years old by the end of 2029. There's definitely discussion to be had there to extend those regulations beyond, and I personally think they will.
If we were co-leading the regulations, we're extending them.
Scrolling down, looking for additional questions here. Who will win the LMGT3 championship? Oh, what are you going to ask me that? That is way too hard to predict right now. Let's throw a dart at the board, I suppose. I do like the Vista AF Corsa Ferraris. Okay, they picked up a win at Bahrain last year to close out the season. I mentioned they were sort of a mid-pack team for a majority of the year. They didn't really show any standout results for a while. But they're looking strong already so far. And of course, they're a strong team in the hypercar class as well. Um, got a gut feeling on one of those. If I have to pick one, give me the 54. But I do think that's probably the hardest prediction I'll have to make this season.
Yeah, that's the LMGT3. We talked about it, it's so wide open, but with it being such a wide open class and you're leaving the door open for me to take the number 33, I am going to take it. It's hard. That it's a strong lineup, and Ben Keating's going to Ben Keating.
Do you think that the ACO will go to a new track next year? Um, I guess this means will the World Endurance Championship go to a new track next year? Um, it's a good question. I'm not confident about it for one reason, and that's I think the championship is really prioritizing stability right now. Um, you have a stable lineup of cars on the grid as it is right now. Adding an additional race onto the calendar would be an additional investment for them. Um, Also, you have to consider the potential if we have 40 cars in the grid next year, you'd have to accommodate 40 cars at an additional track as well. So I'm not anticipating that personally. I know people have been dying for a long time now that they return to Silverstone with a race there. I've heard it rumored a little bit, so I guess that maybe that would be my first guess. But I'm not sure beyond that.
Yeah, Silverstone is the one that kind of comes to mind, but at the end of the day, this is going to come down to money. If there's a country and a sponsor that is going to step up and kick some money into this, then yeah, I definitely think they could go to a different track. If Tim Hortons wanted to kick in a bunch of money and have the cars go to Gilles Villeneuve, heck, yeah, I think the World Endurance Championship is going to Canada next year. The most likely landing spot, I think, would probably be something like Silverstone. But I mean, money makes the world go around. Money makes also the cars go around in circles. So, or I guess it's not a perfect circle, but you know what I'm talking about. So, unless if there's a country or a sponsor that's going to step up, then I think, as you said, stability over trying to push the limits of expansion.
Yeah, Tim Hortons, please do step up and sponsor a race, because I've been dying for a race at Gilles Villeneuve for over 10 years now in the World Endurance Championship. I just think that'd be such a good track for those cars to go. And also, it's the closest race to me. So make it happen, and the two of us will be there.
Bingo. The Tim Hortons, what would it be? I don't even know.
What year did you guys gain your independence? And then we'll do that kilometers.
Oh God, is it 1800s? Is 1867?
Well, that's about the same length as Qatar then. So
yeah, that's true. I feel bad for not knowing this. Anyways, let's carry on.
I gotta put you on the spot. Unfortunately, I lost some of the earlier chat messages that were up, so I'm going to respond from the furthest up it shows, which I don't know if you have any of those other earlier chat messages. Do you think it's in everyone's interest that we see success from other teams such as BMW, Alpine, Peugeot, as it would make the season more unpredictable? Yeah, pretty easy answer from a fan perspective. Of course, a wider variety of teams and manufacturers winning in that hypercar class is probably what most people want to see. Ultimately, I think everybody wants to see all of those cars as competitive with each other as possible. And also, everybody just loves an underdog story. So some of those manufacturers, if you want to consider them underdogs, they haven't picked up a win yet. At least in the World Endurance Championship, none of those three have. So I think any three of those being competitive and potentially picking up a race win this year would go down pretty well for the fans, and also leave the championship more wide open as well.
That is, yes. Anything to increase the number of of competitors in the championship or in that championship discussion as the season goes on, the better. Makes for an interesting end of the season.
Got a super chat saying about hydrogen. Do you have any updates for the WEC? Do I have any updates? No. The World Endurance Championship, the last things they've told us last year was that the current plan, which has been moved back many years at this point, is to do a partial debut in 2028 for 3 races. I think they indicated Spa, Fuji, and Le Mans. Were the 3 that they were eyeing the most. That could, of course, get pushed back even more. We haven't really seen any major news on the hydrogen front since Toyota formalized a commitment, or I guess announced an intention to create a hydrogen car back before the 2023 24 Hours of Le Mans. I would expect you're probably going to hear something about that before Le Mans this year. That's typically when we get some news on that class. But as of right now, no, that's the latest I've heard is partial debut in 2028, and we'll have to check probably around June this year if they'll push that back or change that.
Did you catch El Noob's super chat from earlier about Isada?
I didn't. That was one of the ones that got lost.
Yeah, so it was just why couldn't they or why they couldn't come back? So what kind of happened to them? I mean, we never really got formal confirmation on what the reason was, but I think we have to assume money, right?
Yeah, I would say financials is number one. You also have to look at the 2-car mandate, which was introduced as a second thing. I think that probably hurt them. And of course, they pulled out of the championship after that 2-car mandate was announced at Le Mans last year. I would say financials number one, and then also just change of business direction. Recently, we've seen that they're trying to come out with a road-based version of that Tipo 6C hypercar. So perhaps it's just a change in decision, which, by the way, it's not just those boutique manufacturers which can make those sudden changes. I mean, we can talk about any manufacturer, any OEM can make a change that sudden as well. We've seen Peugeot do that in the past with the 908 program back in 2012. They had a hybrid race car built and ready to start in the 2012 WEC season. Had that car on track doing testing at Estoril and pulled the plug after the car was already created and doing some testing in early 2012. So, but to not get too far off the point, yeah, I think that's just a decision that they made probably around financial reasons.
Yes.
Looks like Toyota. So this is a clarification to something you brought up earlier. If Toyota has additional jokers because their car's older, Dove Jones saying they have 2 extra jokers to the 5 that was added along with the 2029 extension. So I don't know if that's just to the Toyota specifically, or if that's to all the manufacturers who had committed before that extension to 2029. But it does sound like they have a little bit more to work with there than they had previously.
Yep.
Paul Riley saying, any reason customer teams have struggled so badly for success in supposedly identical machinery? There's some great customer teams such as WRT and AF Corsa. Well, WRT is not a customer team. They are a fully fledged factory. Yeah, not in Hypercar. They are a fully fledged factory effort there. And AF Corsa, whether you want to consider them a customer in the hypercar class or not, they did pick up a win last year at Coda, and that arguably I'd say that car was a strong contender to win Le Mans last year as well. So
Joda picked up a win too as a customer team. Porsche.
Yeah. So I don't think they're struggling any more than I would expect. If anything, in IMSA they're struggling a little bit more than in the WEC, but I think a lot of that comes down to the driver lineup, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
They're not getting that top pick factory driver lineups that we're seeing of the Porsche Penske Motorsports of the world, Toyota Gazoo Racing. They're not getting that level of driver. Sometimes they have to find some gold drivers, and nothing to discredit them on that. But you're looking at that, and then you're also just looking at the budget for the team is probably nowhere near what you're seeing out of these top factory programs as well.
Well, and they don't have the data either. You know, you're looking at, Porsche that have a couple of cars running out there. They have so much data. They have the data that's coming over from the IMSA program. There's a lot of just the sheer amount of data and resources that the factory teams have. It's not terribly surprising to see that the customer teams are struggling a little bit more, especially this day and age with all of the engineering knowledge that's really needed to be successful in motorsports. But I think you could flip it and you could say that it's kind of surprising to see some of the success of these customer teams. Like customer teams won 2 races last year. That's impressive. That's more than BMW won last year. That's more than Cadillac won last year, right? So, right, Cadillac didn't win a race last year, and no, they haven't won a WEC race yet, right?
Correct. Yep.
Okay, good. I had to walk back some of my confidence after I made myself look like a fool earlier.
Second guess yourself a lot here.
But the customer teams, they have had some success. So I hope that we continue to see some those customer teams have some success this year, because those always make for nice storylines. And then we get to see some of those customer teams. In the case of Joda, they've transitioned. Now they're a full-fledged factory team. So it's just maybe not as consistent as the factory teams is what I would say.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And I'll take this as the last question for tonight, since we are around typical hour and a half mark we usually shoot for. What are your predictions for the Pratt Miller Corvettes? All right, so we're switching back gears to IMSA here. We'll end things on IMSA. We've talked a lot about the WEC in this show. I think, to keep it simple, I think they're going to be one of those championship contending teams in GTD Pro. You could see how strong they were at Daytona this year, and also how strong they were in the second half of last year. They had a slow start with that Z06 GT3R. Always a struggle to get that name right, but with the performances we saw to that car, it picked up, 2 wins in the second half of last year in IMSA, and we're definitely in the hunt for a race win this year at Daytona, if you want to ignore the controversy they got involved in towards the end of the race. I would say, to me, they're one of those teams I look at as being a potential championship contender at the end of the season.
100% agree. They're going to be strong. They're going to be strong. Solid driver lineup, solid team, solid car. It's usually a recipe for success.
Yeah.
Usually.
They're going to win some race this year. I will take that to the bank. And, at this point, I might as well just make them my prediction every single race until the end of the season, because then at that point I wouldn't miss at least one of them. But then, my luck, I'd probably miss the correct car out of the 2. So
we did that with the 31 last year, and look how that turned out. So
that didn't work. So it's not working for me this year either. So I will call it at that, I think.
I have one closing thought here. Canada became a country in 1867. We didn't gain our full independence from Britain until 1982, though. So that's your Canadian history lesson for this evening.
Pick your distance, and we're going to take it to Montreal. All right, I'll see you there. And we'll leave it at that for now. We have a 10-hour / 1,812 kilometer race to enjoy this weekend, if you consider Friday a weekend. Someone in the chat was from New Zealand. Enjoy that race on a Saturday. And we'll have an episode next weekend to unpack everything from the race. We've got probably a lot to discuss through a full 10-hour race, and then a couple weeks from now, 3 weeks from now, 12 hours of Sebring, plenty more to discuss there. That will be my first IMSA race of the year in person. Very much looking forward to that. So plenty more to come. Get subscribed to the channel if you want to check out some of that. And of course, if you're listening on a podcasting platform, you can add this as one of your listen podcasts on one of those platforms. And those new episodes will show up when we release them. Stu, any closing thoughts for you?
I've already had my closing thoughts, but all this talk about Tim Hortons makes me want some Timbits, which are donut holes. So
yeah. We
Getting a
used to
little
have
hungry.
those here, but they closed them in my area, so
Oh,
got to drive to Buffalo now. Although I guess Montreal is closer than Buffalo. Anyway, I'll do that drive. We'll be back next week to discuss the World Endurance Championship and plenty more. Hope to see you all there. Take care.